Thank you for joining me today and welcome. So this video is not the fourth build episode for this guitar. It's an in-between video that I'm doing as a how-to based on a couple of comments that I had from the last video that I uploaded. So a day ago I put episode 3 of this build up, which focused on producing the control cavity. I had some really nice comments, but a few people have said the same thing, which is that the control cavity is not where they spend the majority of the time building this. It's actually producing the plate that goes onto the cavity where they take a long time, which surprised me because for me that's the quicker part of these two tasks. Okay, so I've got two options. I can either produce a template from this one that I've already got, which is the one I used to carve the recess into the body, or I can just produce the control plate straight from this template. Which one I'll do depends on what material I'm using for the control plate. So if I'm using plastic or metal or something other than wood that you can't route, then I'll produce a template because I'll need to cut and sand around that template. If I'm going to use wood, which I am because this is my rosewood topped guitar, and I've still got some offcuts of rosewood here, then I can just produce the control plate straight from this. The only prerequisite is that the wood that I'm going to use has to be thicker than the depth of the route I've done to recess the control cavity cover in, which is fine in this case because the rosewood is about 3.5mm thick and the recess I've done into the body is just over 2.5mm, so that's fine. And you'll see why that's the case as soon as I get started, which I'm about to do. So let's do it. Okay, there's really only two things that we need to do here. The first is to produce exactly the shape that is a fraction smaller all the way around the edge, and the second is to produce that in a material that we can get to the correct thickness for the depth of the cavity that we've recessed into the body. So the first part that I'll tackle is the size of this shape, which I'll do by wrapping 2 layers of masking tape around the inside of the template. That's 2 layers of masking tape on. So all I need now is my material for the control plate cover, and I'm ready to pop this on and start routing. That's all solid and ready for routing. So I know that the recess I did in the body was 2.5mm and that this is currently 3.5mm thick. So what I'm going to do is to take the router and take out everything inside the template down by just under 1mm, and that will leave me with the perfect imprint for the control cavity cover, and it will be the correct thickness for the cover too. And because we use 2 layers of masking tape, it should be exactly the right size to fit onto the inside of the cavity that I've cut. So I need to route this precisely, which means it's really important that I don't use any lateral pressure on the router and risk moving this template at all as I'm going. So let's give it a go. And I can control the depth of that cut by pushing down the router until it makes contact with the wood, locking it off, and then using my depth adjustment here, I'll just wind it out to allow it to go down another 0.75mm. Okay, let's take a look. I've got no idea how well you're going to be able to see this on camera, but I'll try and move it around so at some point it will grab the light. So because that imprint is now exactly the right thickness and also exactly the right size, if I were to just cut round the outline of this an extra millimetre, then all I need to do is just to carefully sand away until the lip is completely gone, leaving me with the control cavity cover that should slot nicely into there. So let's do that. It's really not too easy to mark up on dark wood where you've got to cut, so just to make sure it's really obvious to me, I'll take a coloured pencil and just run it along this hard ridge that I've got now, which will give me a really sharp defined line. And my cutting out doesn't need to be particularly neat. The only thing I need to make sure that I do is to not cut inside this line, because everything else up to it is going to get sanded. Okay, so you might just be able to see I'm not the best with a handsaw, but I've left about 1mm around the edge. So the last thing I need to do now is just to take this and sand away this last bit of the edge. Now you could argue that that's really no different to drawing on a pencil line and sanding up to it, but when you have a physical lip that you've got to remove, with sanding either on the spindle sander or by hand, it's immeasurably easier than trying to sand to a pencil line. Okay, so the very last bit of that lip has just disappeared, and you might even just be able to see on the edge here the last bits. It's a tiny bit too tight now. If I press it, it will go in, but I won't be able to get it out, so I've literally just pressed it enough that it's holding in there and under its own pressure. But the only thing stopping that from sliding in perfectly is the imperfections, because there are some tiny ridges which I've done with the spindle sander. So that's all I'll do with the spindle sander, and now as soon as I go round this with some sandpaper just on a little block of wood, it's going to remove all the imperfections, and that's going to drop in and out, no problems at all. Okay, that's fine, that's at the point I can press it in. What I'm going to do is just to quickly show you how I'm going to drill holes in here for where I've left the wood, and then I can actually press it in. On my template I used to cut the cavity, I've just marked on where I want some holes, and I'm going to use a 2mm bit just to drill through there. I'll just pop the cavity cover on the top, masking tape it on, flip it over and drill holes, so there's no guesswork. So with the help of a screw, I should be able to test this out now and be able to get the plate out again. Now I don't know whether you can see or not on the camera, but the plate is still a fraction of a millimetre too thick, which is exactly what I wanted, because I've got to do finish sanding on it anyway. But that's as good, I think, as you can get a plate to fit. I mean, I had to press it in, so that's how much of a good fit it is. That's the finished cavity plate. Well, so far as the shape is concerned anyway, I mean, it's still pretty rough because I've got some router marks in there, but that's going to be in my next build episode anyway for this guitar. So just a couple of things to mention before I wrap the video up. I'm not really concerned with how long stuff takes me to build, unless I think part of the process is taking me a disproportionate amount of time, at which point I'll have a think about how I could do something better. But I did record how long this took just because a couple of people had said it takes them a really long time to build them. So even with the recording, that took me 48 minutes to get to this point. So maybe try this out if it's taking you more than a couple of hours. I mean, it might be something that helps. Or it might just be a bit more of a foolproof way to do it. So for me, it's about the fact that it's just more difficult for me to make a mistake doing it this way, which is the main reason I do it like that. So as with all of these things, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm still learning every day. But if this is of some use to people out there, then that's really good. So I appreciate this video might be a little bit unpolished and rushed, but I thought I'd get something out since I had some comments from the last video. So if there's any parts of the guitar build that you would like to see me make videos on, if it's something that I'm confident that I do well, I'll quite happily make a video on that. So leave a comment if that's something you like. And as always, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll have a new episode soon.